Shane Ellington's hand was bleeding all over the Italian leather of his steering wheel when his Maserati sputtered to a stop in front of the only building within sight, a tiny urgent care clinic off the highway. "Damn it," he muttered, gripping his wrist with his other hand to stop the blood from dripping onto his coat. The gash from the broken whiskey glass back at the estate party was deeper than he'd thought. He shouldn't have stormed out. He shouldn't have punched that wall either, but he had. And now he was bleeding through his $2,000 shirt. The bell above the clinic door jingled as he stepped inside. It was quiet, clean, smelled faintly of antiseptic and mint gum. A nurse at the front desk looked up from her clipboard. "I need stitches," Shane said, lifting his arm. Now, the nurse blinked. "You're dripping on the floor." "Yes," he said evenly. "I'm aware." "Follow me," she said, already walking briskly down the hall. He followed, his expensive shoes echoing against the tile. She was shorter than him by a lot, with her wavy brown hair tied up in a bun that somehow still looked soft. Her scrubs fit her like they were made for her, and he didn't miss the way her voice didn't tremble once, even when she saw the blood. She led him into a small exam room. "Sit," he sat. She pulled on gloves. "I'm Sienna Zeller. I'm the only nurse on shift tonight. Doctor's gone for the evening, but I can stitch that up." Shane raised a brow. "You stitched people before." She looked at him like he'd asked if she knew how to walk. "Plenty." "You'll live." He watched her clean the wound with practiced hands. She didn't ask how it happened, didn't recognize him. That was new. "You're not gonna ask what I did," he said. "You're bleeding," she replied, not looking up. "That's my business, not why." He tilted his head. "You always this direct?" "Only when someone's getting blood on my floor," she said, then added, "This'll sting." He winced as she started stitching. Her hands were steady, shockingly gentle. She smelled like citrus and something warm. Like vanilla, maybe. He hadn't noticed a scent like that in years, not since women started wearing perfume they thought rich men liked. She didn't try to flirt, didn't bat her lashes, didn't even look twice at his watch. He exhaled slowly. "You're good at this." "Thanks," she said. "You're lucky it's not deeper." He looked down at her. "You always work this late," she shrugged. "Night shifts pay better. You should work somewhere." "Bigger," he said. She looked up at him then, her eyes a calm hazel green that made something in his chest pull tight. "You're not from around here?" "No, didn't think so. People in this town don't drive cars like that." She nodded toward the window where his Maserati was parked crooked across two spots. Shane grinned despite himself. "You're not impressed, should I be?" He was starting to like her. A lot. She finished the last stitch and sat back. "All done. Keep it clean. Don't punch any more walls." He blinked. "You knew. You've got drywall dust on your sleeve." He laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks. Sienna peeled off her gloves. "You can go. Try not to bleed on the door." He stood, feeling oddly reluctant. "You got a number I can call if it gets worse." "Clinics on Google," she said, already turning back to her paperwork. He hesitated. "What if I wanted to thank you properly?" She looked up, arching a brow. "You want to send me a fruit basket?" He smiled. "Dinner? You're bleeding from the hand and asking me out." "I'm persistent." She considered him for a moment. "You don't even know my last name." "You told me, Zeller." She blinked. "You were actually listening." He leaned against the doorframe, ignoring the throb in his hand. "You didn't ask mine." "I'm sure it's something very Wall Street," he chuckled. "Shane Ellington." Her eyes flickered. "Wait, like Ellington Tech." He didn't answer. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're that guy I wasn't trying to be. No wonder you didn't go to the ER. You didn't want tabloids catching another scandal." He stiffened slightly. "Something like that." Sienna crossed her arms. "Why are you really here?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because I was bleeding. And because I needed to breathe." She didn't say anything. "Dinner," he said again. "Say yes." She hesitated, biting her lip. He added, "One dinner, no press, no expectations." She tilted her head. "You're used to getting your way, aren't you?" "I used to be," he said, quieter this time. She studied him, then finally said, "Fine, one dinner, but you're picking me up in something less flashy." He grinned. "So no Maserati," she pointed at the door. "Go home, rest. I'll give you my number tomorrow if your stitches look clean." He stepped out, then paused. "You stitched me up. You know that means you sorta saved my life." She rolled her eyes. "Go before I charge you double." He left smiling. The next day she did give him her number, and the day after that Shane pulled up in a black truck that looked Normal. Sienna wore jeans and a soft pink top and didn't seem nervous at all. Shane took her to a private rooftop restaurant with fairy lights and a string quartet, and she spent half the night laughing at how ridiculous it was. "You rented the whole rooftop?" she asked, sipping wine. "I didn't want to share you with anyone. I'm not a bottle of wine," she teased. He leaned closer. "No, you're better." She went quiet, eyes softening. After dinner, he handed her a small box. Inside, a silver charm bracelet. "I didn't, Shane, this is why. Because you didn't treat me like I was someone." She looked up at him. "You are someone." He touched her hand. "So are you." She didn't say anything, but she didn't pull away. 2 weeks passed, then 3. They met every other night, sometimes at a diner, sometimes in his penthouse, sometimes just walking at the park. Shane found himself craving her voice, her touch, the way she could make him forget every corporate meeting and fake party he ever had to attend. One night, after a long walk by the lake, she turned to him and said, "This is insane." "What is?" "I'm just a nurse. I don't care, but I do," she whispered. "I don't want to be someone you forget when you go back to your world." He cupped her face. "You're the only part of my world that feels real." She blinked rapidly. "I don't want anyone else," he said. Sienna didn't reply, but when he kissed her, she kissed him back like she meant it, hard, like she'd been holding it in since the moment she stitched him up. And just like that, Shane Ellington, the millionaire who never had time for anything that wasn't business, was falling. Fast. The first time Shane brought Sienna to his home, she hesitated on the threshold. "This is your place?" she asked, her hand still on the black marble doorframe. He stepped aside, letting her take it in. "You expected something different." "I don't know. I expected more. Color or books, or maybe a dog." "It's not a museum," he said, tossing his keys onto a low glass console. "I just don't live here much." She wandered in slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of a curved white sofa that looked like it had never been sat on. The view from the floor to ceiling windows stretched over the entire skyline, but she didn't look at it. She was looking at him. "You live in a place this beautiful," she said, "and it feels like no one's ever laughed in here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She was right. Later, when she curled her legs beneath her on that untouched sofa and let her head lean back against the cushion like she belonged there, Shane felt something shift. Not because of the way she fit into the space, but because the space itself seemed to settle around her like it had been waiting. She turned her head toward him. "Do you ever sleep here?" "Sometimes." "Where do you usually sleep?" He hesitated. "Wherever I crash, hotels, guest wings, my office couch." She frowned. "What kind of life is that?" He sat beside her, the distance between them shrinking in a way that felt deliberate. "Efficient." "That's not a life, Shane, that's survival." He looked at her. "And what do you call what you do?" Sienna shrugged. "I make people feel cared for." "That's more than survival." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know, I brought women here before. They always asked about the price of the wine or the brand of the art. You're the first one who asked if anyone's ever laughed in here." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then quietly, "Did they?" He turned his head to her. "You're the first." The silence between them wasn't heavy. It pulsed. Sienna stood and walked slowly to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "You ever think about what you'd be if you weren't rich?" His voice was low. "All the time." She turned to face him, backlit by the lights of the city. "And I'd be a man who still made something of himself, but I think I'd laugh more." She crossed the room and sat beside him again, this time closer. "Then maybe you should start." He didn't touch her, not yet. But he looked at her the way a man does when he knows he's already ruined for anyone else. Later that week, Sienna invited him to her world, a community fundraiser at a local rec center. Fluorescent lighting, folding chairs, and punch that tasted like melted candy. Shane wore a dark button-down and jeans that still somehow looked tailored. He stuck out like a diamond in a gravel pit, but he didn't complain. He stood beside her as she introduced him to her coworkers, her neighbors, even the elderly woman who ran the raffle table with a paper visor and a clipboard. "This is Shane," Sienna said, keeping her voice casual. "He's visiting." The woman narrowed her eyes. "You the one who got stitched up?" "I am," Shane replied, offering a hand. The woman didn't shake it. She studied him. You look like trouble, Shane gave a small smile. Only on Tuesdays. The woman cackled and finally shook his hand. Well, at least you're polite trouble. Sienna watched him from across the room later while he helped stack chairs and listened to her friend's kid explain the rules of some made-up card game. The kid didn't care who he was, neither did the rest of them. For the first time in a long time, Shane looked like he belonged somewhere that didn't have marble floors or a valet. When they slipped out into the night, he took her hand without asking. They walked in silence for a while until he said, "You do this a lot, the fundraiser." "No, this." "Making other people feel like they matter." Sienna looked up at him. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" He stopped walking. "I didn't grow up with that idea." She turned to him. "What did you grow up with?" "Pressure, expectations. Money as a measure of worth." Sienna touched his wrist, just above the edge of his cuff. "And how's that working for you?" He looked at her hand on him, then up to her face. "It wasn't. Until now." The next day, Shane canceled 3 meetings and took her to a gallery tucked behind a bookstore downtown. She hadn't seen it before. Inside, there was a low hum of jazz and walls covered in pieces from unknown artists. He handed her a small card. "You get to pick one." "Pick one what?" "A painting. Any of them." She blinked. "You're not serious." "I bought the gallery this morning." Sienna turned to him so fast her bag nearly slipped from her shoulder. "You what?" "I wanted to take you somewhere that didn't come with a dress code or a camera crew, so you bought it." He shrugged. "I had to make sure it stayed quiet." She stared at him. "You're insane." "But you're smiling." She was. She hadn't meant to. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Pick one," he said again. She walked the room slowly, then stopped at a painting of a woman standing alone in a field under a stormy sky. It wasn't pretty, but it was arresting. "This one," she said. He nodded. "Why?" "Because she's not afraid of the storm." He looked at her for a long moment. "Neither are you." She didn't answer. That night, back at her apartment, the one with mismatched pillows and a chipped coffee table, Sienna pulled a blanket around them both as they sat on her couch, sharing leftover pasta and watching an old movie with terrible sound. Shane didn't check his phone once. She leaned her head on his shoulder halfway through the film and whispered, "You're not what I expected." He tilted his head toward her. "What did you expect? Someone who bought affection the way he buys buildings." He didn't reply. But he kissed her hair, soft and slow, like he was learning how to speak without words. He woke the next morning with her beside him, sunlight streaking across the floor. She was still asleep, one hand curled near her face. He watched her for a long time, something in his chest aching at the sight. He didn't have meetings that day. He didn't go home. Instead, he made her coffee, burnt the toast, and apologized with a grin that made her laugh loud enough to startle the neighbors. They spent the whole day doing nothing. And for once, it was everything, but peace doesn't last forever. Not when your name comes with headlines. The first sign came that evening, his name flashing across the news at a bar where they'd gone for live music. A reporter shouting about a hostile takeover. A lawsuit. A betrayal. Shane's jaw clenched. Sienna touched his arm. "You don't have to tell me anything." But he did. Outside, under the shadow of the awning, he said, "My company's under attack. One of my board members is selling out. I might lose everything I built." She searched his face. "What do you need?" He shook his head. "It's not that simple." "I didn't ask for simple. I asked what you need." His voice cracked. "Someone who believes in me." She stepped closer. "I do." The look he gave her then wasn't grateful. It was reverent. But inside, Shane knew it was only a matter of time before the storm reached her too. And he wasn't sure if he could protect her from it. Sienna stepped into Shane's office just after sunset, the city glowing behind her in molten gold and steel blue. She didn't knock. He'd left the door unlocked, and his assistant had already vanished for the day. She found him at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie long discarded and forgotten on the couch behind him. The light from his desk lamp carved sharp shadows across his face, and his jaw was set like stone. She crossed the room without a word and placed a paper cup in front of him. "Chamomile," she said. "With honey." He looked up slowly. "You walked through 3 security doors to bring me tea." "I walked through 3 security doors to see if you're still breathing," she replied. The tea was just an excuse. He leaned back in the chair and watched her take the one across from him. You shouldn't be here. Why not? You think I'll catch scandal through the air vents? This place is going to implode, he said. And I might go down with it. Then maybe I came to make sure you don't. He exhaled and looked away. You saw the press conference. I saw the parts they didn't mute. She leaned forward. You think I scare that easily? I think you don't understand what happens when the sharks smell blood, he said, voice low. They don't just circle you, they circle everyone you've touched. And I'm not ashamed to be someone you've touched. His eyes flicked to hers. She held his gaze. I'm not walking away just because things got complicated. It's not just complicated, Sienna. It's war. I'm fighting people who know exactly where to hit me. Then let me be the place they can't reach. He stood then, not abruptly, not in anger, but like he couldn't sit a second longer. Pacing to the window, he pressed a palm against the glass and stared down at the glittering street. I've spent 15 years building something I thought would make me untouchable, and all it took was one man with a grudge and a few signatures to gut it. Everything my father never thought I could do. Stop, she said, rising. I don't care about your father. He turned. I care about you, she said. And I'm not going to let you unravel because someone betrayed you. You think I'm unraveling. I think you're bleeding again, she said. Only this time it's not your hand. He crossed the room and stopped inches from her. You don't know what it feels like. No, I don't, she said, but I know what it looks like, and I know what to do when someone's in pain. He reached out but didn't touch her. What happens if I lose everything? Then we rebuild. He stared at her like she'd spoken in a language no one else had ever dared to use with him. She added softer, but you won't lose everything. Not as long as you have people who still believe in you. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for a decade and pulled her to him. She folded into his arms like she belonged there, like she'd always been meant to be the calm in his storm. I don't know how to do this, he murmured into her hair. Then let's learn together. The next morning, Shane did something he hadn't done since his company's founding. He showed up to a board meeting without a single document in hand. No legal team, no PowerPoint, just him. The conference room was already buzzing when he arrived, but the second he stepped in, silence fell like a curtain. He walked to the head of the table, looked each man and woman in the eye, and said, You've all read the reports. You know what's been said. But what you don't know is this: I'm not going to let this company be torn apart by fear. One of the board members, a man with graying temples and a soft voice that usually disguised how ruthless he could be, leaned forward. You're asking us to trust you again without showing us the numbers. No, Shane said. I'm asking you to look at the bigger picture. If we cave now, we send a message to every competitor watching that we're weak. That we eat our own when the pressure hits. A woman across the table folded her hands. And what's your solution? Shane met her gaze. We go public with the betrayal. We expose what's been happening behind closed doors. I've already filed the paperwork to have the involved parties investigated. Murmurs spread through the room like water over rocks. You're starting a war, someone said. I'm ending one, Shane replied, and I'll stand alone if I have to. He didn't have to. The vote was close. But it was enough. By the end of the hour, the tides had shifted. That night, he didn't go back to his penthouse. He went to Sienna's apartment, the one with the cracked kitchen tile and the humming fridge. She opened the door barefoot, with her hair damp from a shower and a notebook in her hand. You look like someone who just survived a storm, she said, stepping aside. I did, he said, and I thought if I was still standing after it, I'd come here. She closed the door behind him and leaned against it. So, what now? He looked around. I want to know what your world looks like when you're not stitching up emergencies or saving the sanity of millionaires. She grinned. You mean you want to know what I do when I'm off shift? Exactly. She vanished into the next room and returned with a small, battered sketchpad. I draw, she said. Not well, but it helps me think. He took the pad from her hands and flipped it open. The sketches were soft, mostly pencil, people on benches, coffee cups, a child asleep on a mother's shoulder. These are good, he said. They're just lines. They're moments, he corrected. I forgot how to see those. She watched him carefully. You're different tonight. I feel different, he admitted, like something that's been locked up in me cracked open. She stepped closer. And what came out? He cupped her face slowly, reverently. Their kiss wasn't urgent, it wasn't rushed. It was the kind of kiss that said, I see you, that said I'm not going anywhere. That said I've been waiting for this without knowing I was waiting at all. Afterward, they lay tangled together on her couch, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she whispered. He was quiet for a long time. When I was 12, he said, I used to sneak out of school and go sit behind the maintenance shed just to get away from the pressure. Everyone thought I was this perfect prodigy. I hated it. I wanted to be invisible. She kissed the center of his chest. You're not invisible now. I don't want to be, not with you. She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of his heart. Good, because I see you, Shane, the real you, and I'm not going to let you disappear again. In the days that followed, the scandal began to unravel publicly. Shane's decision to fight back earned him praise in the press. Headlines stopped calling him reckless and started calling him relentless. The man who tried to sabotage him was formally charged for corruption. The tide had turned. But none of it felt like victory until the night Shane stood on the balcony outside a gala he couldn't avoid, dressed in a tux that fit like armor, and saw Sienna walking toward him in a soft silver dress that shimmered like moonlight. You came, he said, breath catching. I said I would, she replied. You didn't think I'd let you face them alone, did you? You hate these things. I hate pretending, she said, but I'm not pretending tonight. He extended his hand. Dance with me, she took it. Only if you don't step on me. He pulled her into the circle of his arms, and as the music swelled around them, the world fell away. Everyone's watching, she murmured against his shoulder. Let them, he said. I want them to see exactly who I belong to. And in that moment, under the glow of 1,000 chandeliers and 100 whispered names, Shane Ellington knew one thing with absolute certainty. He hadn't just survived the storm, he'd found the one person who made the chaos worth it. Rain fell in sheets across the city as Shane pulled the truck to a halt in front of the clinic. The same one where this had all begun. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the last of the patients gone, the windows glowing warm against the storm. He killed the engine and sat still for a beat, watching the rivulets of water trace the windshield like veins. He hadn't planned on coming here tonight. But something had pulled him off course, a quiet urgency that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the ache he hadn't been able to shake since watching Sienna walk away from the gala with that unreadable look in her eyes. She hadn't said much when she'd left. Just a soft, I need to think, before slipping into the town car he'd sent for her. He stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, ignoring the way his shirt clung instantly to his skin. The front door was locked, but the side entrance where deliveries came in was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Sienna was at the sink in the break room, rinsing out a mug with slow, deliberate movements. Her hair was pulled back in a low braid, and she wore a faded navy sweatshirt over her scrubs. She didn't turn when she heard him. You're dripping everywhere, she said calmly. I figured if I showed up soaking wet, you'd have no choice but to patch me up again, he replied. She shut off the faucet and reached for a towel. Do you make a habit of showing up at people's jobs after midnight? Only yours. She dried her hands and finally looked at him. What are you doing here, Shane? He stepped further in, leaving a trail of water behind him. I didn't like the way we left things. She folded the towel and placed it on the counter, her eyes unreadable. We didn't leave anything, we just paused. I don't want to pause, he said. I want to understand what changed. Her voice was quiet. Nothing changed. That's the problem, he frowned. I don't follow. Sienna leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You're still the same man who has a world that moves faster than anyone can breathe in. And I'm still the woman who lives in a town where the biggest news is when the vending machine eats someone's dollar. I don't care about any of that. You should. He took a step closer. Why? Because I do. Shane let out a frustrated breath. You told me once you believed in me. Was that just something you said in the moment? No, she said. It was the truest thing I've ever said to someone I barely knew. Then help me understand why you're pulling away. She looked down at her hands. Because I'm falling in love with you. The words landed in the room like thunder, sharp and impossible to ignore. Shane didn't move. His pulse roared in his ears, not from shock, but from the clarity that surged through him. "And that scares you?" he asked. "It terrifies me," she admitted. "Because I don't know how to belong in your world, and I don't want to be the thing you look back on with regret when it gets too inconvenient." "You think I'd regret you?" "I think people like you don't get to stay still for long." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and took her face in his hands, not with urgency, but with quiet reverence. "I've never stood still in my life until you." Her breath hitched. "I've had everything a man could buy. I've flown to cities I can't remember the names of. I've signed deals worth more than some countries' economies. But I've never felt what I feel when I'm with you." He leaned in, his voice rough. "You're not the pause in my story, Sienna. You're the rewrite." She blinked rapidly, her fingers curling into his shirt. "You can't just say things like that and expect me to believe you'll mean it in a year." "Then let me show you." She shook her head. "That's just more grand gestures. That's what you do. You fix things with money or charm or buying entire buildings." "No," he said, stepping back. "Not this time." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the contents, her brows pulled together. "This is a resignation letter," she said. "I'm stepping down as CEO." Her head snapped up. "What?" "I've been grooming someone for the last year to take over. I just didn't know when I'd be ready to let go. I thought I'd need to be dragged out, but now I'm choosing to walk away." She stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life chasing power in rooms that feel hollow. I want to wake up next to someone who makes burnt toast and hums off-key. I want to be in a place where I remember why I started building in the first place." Tears welled in her eyes before she could blink them back. "You don't have to give everything up for me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm giving everything up for me. You just made me remember what that looks like." She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. He stepped close again, gentler this time. "Come with me." "Where?" "Anywhere, everywhere. We'll figure it out, but I don't want to do it without you." She gave a watery laugh. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." Thunder rumbled outside, low and distant. She looked up at him and whispered, "I've never done anything like this." "Neither have I." She took his hand slowly. "Then maybe we're both overdue." A week later, the town buzzed with whispers. Not about lawsuits or scandals, but about the strange sight of Shane Ellington loading boxes into a modest moving van outside a small house on Maple Street. A house with a tiny porch and a crooked mailbox. A house he had bought not for the view, not for the location, but because it was 5 minutes from the clinic and had a kitchen that Sienna said she loved, even though the sink leaked. Sienna walked up the path with paint samples in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. "You know we don't have to paint everything in one weekend," she said. "I know," Shane replied, taking the bag from her. "But I want to see it all come together." She looked around at the half-empty living room, the mismatched furniture, the sunlight streaming through the window they'd just cleaned. "This is real," she said softly. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "It's ours." That night, they sat on the floor eating takeout and drinking wine from coffee mugs. No suits, no flashbulbs, just the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the hum of their laughter filling the space. Sienna leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you miss it?" "The company," she nodded. He thought for a moment. "Not even a little." She turned her head to look at him. "What do you want now?" He kissed her forehead. "You, tomorrow, the next 50 years," she smiled. "We're going to fight like hell sometimes. I'm counting on it. We'll probably disagree about which way the forks should face in the dishwasher, absolutely. And I'm not going to pretend I know how to be in a relationship that suddenly includes gala invitations and breakfast meetings with investors. You don't have to," he said. "There are no more meetings, just mornings with you." She reached for his hand and laced their fingers together. Outside, the storm passed. Inside, the light stayed on. In a world full of chaos, they had found something quiet, something true, something neither of them had expected. He had come in bleeding, she had stitched him back together, and in the strangest, most impossible way, they had both healed. The knock at the door came just as Sienna was finishing folding the last of the laundry. She wasn't expecting anyone. Shane had texted earlier that he was running errands, something about needing new paintbrushes for the guest room, and an emergency stop at the bakery down the block, an emergency that always ended with him buying 3 different pastries and convincing her it was for research. She padded down the hallway barefoot, still wearing the oversized flannel shirt he insisted she keep even though it had clearly been his favorite. When she opened the front door, the first thing she noticed wasn't Shane's face, but the way he was holding a single white rose and looking entirely too serious for a man standing in the rain without a jacket. "You forgot your keys again?" she asked. "No," he said, voice low. "I needed the moment." She stepped aside and let him in, her brows pulling together. "What happened?" He handed her the rose, then reached into the inside pocket of his soaked blazer and pulled out a folded envelope. "This came today." She took it carefully. The paper was thick, the envelope embossed, legal, formal. She didn't open it. "What is it?" He ran a hand through his wet hair and exhaled. "It's the final paperwork, all ties cut, my name's off the board, no more press, no more stock options, officially free." She stared at the envelope. "How do you feel?" His eyes softened as he looked at her. "Like I've finally emptied a room in my chest I didn't know I'd been storing grief in." Sienna set the envelope down on the side table and cupped his face with both hands. "I'm proud of you. I didn't do it for pride. I know," she said, brushing her thumbs along his cheekbones, "but I'm proud anyway." He caught her hands and held them to his chest. "I want to ask you something, but I need to do it right." She tilted her head. "You're scaring me." "Don't be scared," he said. "Just wait." And then, without another word, he stepped back out into the rain and disappeared around the corner of the house. She stood frozen, heart thudding in her throat. A minute passed, then another. The lights in the backyard flicked on one by one, the motion sensors casting golden halos across the grass. She crossed the living room and opened the back door. The entire yard had been transformed. Dozens of paper lanterns floated above the lawn, tethered to thin strings Shane had somehow rigged between the trees. A path of flickering candles had been laid out in a gentle curve, leading to the center of the yard where a picnic blanket had been spread out beneath their favorite oak tree. On it sat a bottle of champagne, 2 mismatched glasses, and a small velvet box. Shane stood at the end of the candlelit path, waiting. She stepped outside, rain forgotten, bare feet sinking into the damp grass. He didn't move as she approached, letting her come to him in her own time. When she reached him, he took her hands again and held them between them like something sacred. "I've been trying to figure out the perfect moment to ask you this," he said. "But I realized that waiting for perfect is what kept me from living for a long time." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. "I don't have the company anymore. I don't have the boardrooms or the headlines or the weight of a legacy I didn't ask to carry. But I have you. And that means I have everything." He dropped to one knee, the rain soaking into the knees of his jeans, and opened the velvet box. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. Not flashy, not ostentatious, just a simple platinum band with a single oval diamond nestled in a halo of sapphires. "Sienna Zeller," he said, "you stitched me up when I was bleeding. You gave me a place to rest when I didn't know I needed one. You taught me that being seen is worth more than being admired, and I want to spend the rest of my life seeing you, loving you. Growing with you." She laughed through her tears, her whole face alight. "You're proposing in the rain." "I figured it was poetic," he said. "You don't mind, do you?" She dropped to her knees in front of him and threw her arms around his neck. "Only if you put the ring on before I lose it in the grass." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit like it had been waiting for her all along. They kissed beneath the tree, the rain soft now like a blessing. The lanterns swayed gently above them, casting soft golden light across their skin. It wasn't perfect. It was better. 3 months later, they were married in the garden of the old bookstore where they'd chosen their first piece of art together. The owner, a wiry woman with lavender glasses and a fondness for eavesdropping, insisted on closing the shop for the day and decorating the courtyard with wildflowers from her sister's farm. Sienna wore a pale champagne dress with flutter sleeves and no train. Shane wore a navy suit with no tie and a boutonniere made of white roses and lavender. There were fewer than 30 people there. No photographers, no press, just the people who mattered. Her maid of honor was the elderly nurse who'd trained her in school. His best man was a former janitor from his corporate building who'd once helped him through a panic attack in a stairwell at 2 in the morning. They wrote their own vows. Shane's voice cracked halfway through his, and Sienna whispered, "Keep going." "I want to remember every word." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Shane didn't wait. He kissed her like the word forever had just become real. They danced beneath strings of lights and toasted with lemonade because Sienna had never liked champagne. They left the party barefoot, shoes in hand, and walked the 6 blocks to their house while the sun set behind them. Inside, the living room was filled with wedding gifts, none of them extravagant. A set of hand-painted mugs, a knitted throw blanket with their initials. A framed sketch of the bookstore courtyard. Shane picked her up bridal style and carried her across the threshold. "Tradition," he said. "You're going to throw your back out," she warned. "Then it'll be worth it." He set her down in the middle of the kitchen, where the tiles still needed replacing, and kissed her until the world faded out around them. They spent their honeymoon in a borrowed cabin on a lake so quiet they could hear their own breathing at night. Sienna read 4 novels and sketched the view every morning. Shane learned to cook pancakes without burning them and taught himself how to skip stones. One night, wrapped in blankets on the porch, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever miss it? The skyscrapers, the noise?" He shook his head. "This is the first time in my life I've ever felt peace." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me too." Years passed, they didn't move. They didn't need to. Sienna opened a small wellness clinic with 2 other nurses focused on preventive care and community outreach. Shane handled the books. He never missed a staff meeting, even when they happened in the back room of a converted bakery. He published a book about leadership and the cost of ambition. It sold well, but more importantly, it started conversations. Real ones. They hosted neighborhood dinners, slow-cooked meals with mismatched chairs and too many candles. They adopted a retired greyhound who refused to climb stairs but loved sleeping in the laundry basket. On their 6th anniversary, Shane took Sienna back to the rooftop restaurant where they'd had their first real dinner. It had changed owners, but the view was the same. They stood at the edge of the terrace, hands clasped, watching the city below. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" she asked. "I said I didn't want to share you with anyone," she smiled. "You still feel that way?" He pulled her closer. "More than ever." And when he kissed her, it wasn't like the first kiss or the second or the 1,000th. It was like the only one that had ever mattered. They didn't build an empire, they built a life, and it was more than enough.